Okay, today we are going to explore the skeleton tool and the plastic tool. Okay, so I have this Gothic guy, and if I go up a couple levels to the highest level X sheet, you can see that there's a sketch here which is currently turned off. So that was the original drawing that I did. Okay, and then this sub-X sheet I'm going to go ahead and stretch down to 12 frames, and now I'm going to go down into the sub-X sheet, which if you're using a mouse, you would mouse over the level heading and open sub-X sheet. Now I have that mapped to a hotkey control down arrow. So the way I think of it is I'm going down into the sub-X sheet, or I'm coming up out of it. So when I want to create a sub-X sheet, I grab the columns and I hit Control Shift down arrow, which in my head means collapse them into a sub-X sheet, and then again Control down arrow to go down into it, Control up arrow to come back out of it. So that's how I have it set up. You can do your hotkeys any way you want. But if we go down into the sub-X sheet, we see that the eyes move here, so there's a little animation, but that's not reflecting when we come back up out of the sub-X sheet. The eyes aren't moving, and the reason for that is if you do some animation within a sub-X sheet, you need to go resequence on the combined X sheet, and then any animation, as you can see, that was contained within the sub-X sheet will then be reflected, and you can see that the frames are now numbered accordingly as well. Okay, so that solves that problem. So there's basically two things we want to do. Number one, we want to add the ability to have lip sync animation, and number two, we want to possibly set up his head with the plastic tool so that maybe he could do a nod of the head, but do it in a way that controls the mesh that's going to be generated around the drawing, so that we only deform the stuff that we want to deform. And I'm kind of doing this live, so I don't, I may not get it completely right the first try, but you'll definitely see how to do it. So anyway, this sub-X sheet has another sub-X sheet, and in the sub-X sheet, once you go down into it, of course the eyeballs are in the next level up. You can see that this is a, I believe I did this as a Toonz raster level drawing. And so we have this palette. So what I need to do is, if I want to do lip sync, the first thing I need to do is erase his mouth. So what I'm going to do is just erase the mouth, and then I'm going to hit the fill tool and grab this flesh tone and color it in. Okay, so now I'm going to save all, save early, save often. That's really all I needed to do there. So now I can jump back up out of here. Okay, so now what we're going to do, let me think about this. I think I'm just going to do this on the top level. There's no real reason to do it elsewhere. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and draw a mouth over here. So, okay, and what I want to do is grab this brush. All right, so there's a basic shape. But now I'm going to go into the animation room. I'm going to insert, oh, sorry, I hit the I key instead of hitting insert. Okay, now I'm going to turn on my onion skins so I can see the prior frame. Oh, come on, drag that up there. Okay. Oh, I see, I rearranged them. That's okay, that doesn't really matter. Okay, so now I can see the other one, and I'm just going to add some mouth shapes. Oops, don't want that to be that color. Okay, so there's that. Going to insert another one, and we'll make this one a smile. So I'm trying to make this as simple as possible for demonstration purposes. Okay, so I'm going to zoom way in here so I can kind of see what I'm doing a little bit better. Just go ahead and color this in. So right now I'm doing the mouth on a raster level. So that's why I'm using the My Paint brushes. So now let's go ahead and go back to the drawing room. And by the way, your rooms may be set up differently than mine. It's totally customizable. I've actually, I think by default, the drawing room has the list of drawings and the animation room doesn't, and I've got them reversed. So your screen may look different than mine. But now what we have is we have the smiling face, because you'll notice I had kind of rearranged the drawing so the smile is up here at the top. So it put that one on as the default one. And frankly, I don't like that smile. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the erase button and redraw that. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch this column down here. Okay, now let me give you my take on the skeleton tool. The skeleton tool is super cool in one way, but the way I use it is different than what most people do. Because when you click on the skeleton tool, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to set up a relationship between the guy's head and the guy's mouth. So the mouth will be a child of the head. So if the head were to move, the mouth would go with him. Okay, there's more than one way to do that in Opentoonz. And frankly, if I'm just setting up a hierarchy between parts of a character or a puppet animation, if you will, I usually would never use the skeleton tool, because I find that it's fairly persnickety for setting things up. So what I'm going to say is, when you're about to do what I'm trying to do, there are really 3 steps. Step 1 is set up the hierarchy. What is the parent or child of what else? In this case, we've got the mouth that's the child of the head. Okay, so set up the hierarchy. Step 2 is to set up the pivot points, so that if something is going to rotate, like an arm, you know, if you've got an arm that's in 2 pieces, forearm and upper arm, then the pivot point for the forearm would be at the elbow, so that when you rotate it, it rotates like this, as opposed to, say, rotating around the center point, which wouldn't make any sense. Okay, so you've got to have the hierarchy, you've got to set up the pivot points, and then you go ahead and either animate it, or the unique thing about the skeleton tool is it gives you the ability to switch between drawings instantly in your animation, so that if, for example, you wanted to use a sequence of drawings as the way I'm using it, which is essentially lip sync positions, just mouth shapes, the skeleton tool actually makes it really easy to switch between the mouth shapes anytime you want to, right in your animation. So that's kind of the main thing I'm going to show you how to do. So first thing is hierarchy. In our case, we don't have any joints that are going to bend. In a perfect world, this head would consist of 2 pieces. It'd be the head and then the neck, and I could show you that. But for our purposes, the important thing is, what's the hierarchy? So I'm going to go ahead and open the schematic view. I normally have it on my other screen, but okay, so all I want to show you here is that when you're thinking about what your hierarchy is, I find that by far the easiest way to handle it is just to do it in the schematic view, because to me it's visually intuitive. In our case, column 1 is our sketch, so we don't need that. Column 2 is right here, it's the guy's head, and column 3 is the mouth. So we just draw a wire from column 2 to column 3, and that's it. That's it. Now if I were to hit A for the animate tool and try to change the position of the head, the mouth goes along with it. So how could that be any more intuitive? So for my money, using the schematic tool to set up a hierarchy visually makes way more sense. I've tried to do it directly with the skeleton tool, and you can do that. The good news is anything you do in the schematic view is reflected in the skeleton tool instantly, and vice versa. If you were to set up a connection with the skeleton tool, it would also show up in the hierarchy. So in other words, if I use the skeleton tool and I start dragging bones around and pointing them to different levels. You can experiment and see how this works, but just take my word for it. You can use the skeleton tool to set up a relationship of a connection between one level and another. If you do that, the schematic updates accordingly. And basically, the skeleton tool then does for you what I just did, which is just connect the two levels with a wire. So right now we've got a mouth that is essentially a child of the head. Okay? So now, if on frame 4, I want to change the mouth shape, right here you can see, because the skeleton tool is activated, I've got this H1, and that's because it's, right now, what we see is image H1. If I switch it to H2, and then maybe come down here, switch it to H3, drag this down here, then cut a couple frames out, and there you go. So now, and I'm going to slow this down to actually 12 frames a second. Okay, so Opentoonz gave me the ability to really, really quickly set up a lip sync kind of situation. And you can use those, if you ever used Anime Studio Pro, this is what they call switch layers. You have a bunch of images, and you only ever see one at a time, and by switching between them, you're basically just doing what I'm doing here. It's like cutout animation, or it's frame by frame type animation. Okay, so I'm going to save my work now, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and climb up out of here. Oh, okay, these two are not combined, so I'm going to go ahead and combine these into a sub-X sheet. Control Shift, boom. Okay, so now we have a sub-X sheet that has got the eye movement, but you'll notice the lip sync is missing. Well, why is that? Same reason I told you before. We need to resequence it. So let's resequence that, and hopefully that will work. And it doesn't. Okay, so now that's interesting. And let's go down into the sub-X sheet and try to figure out what's going on. Okay. Now this is actually very interesting. This kind of suggests a bug to me. I haven't seen this one before, but you'll notice that this is switching from drawing 1 to drawing 2, back to 1, 3, back to 1. But nothing is happening visually. So, gosh, what do we do? How do we figure that one out? Let's mute that channel and just look at the mouth. H1, H2, H1. Okay, I think I know what happened. I saw something like this earlier. I have a bad feeling about this. No? Okay, because I had a situation earlier where there were two drawings that I was switching between, and they were different. And then after I took some steps, all of a sudden the two drawings were the same. In this case, we're still showing, okay, see, now that's interesting. Okay, that's a bug. That's a bug. So just be aware of it. It could be that the process of taking that baked-in switch animation and wrapping it into a sub-X sheet caused Opentoonz to get confused, because right now I can't even see the different images. So let's just go ahead and see if we can fix that. Let's go back to this. Let's save all, and then I'm just going to open and close. All right, so let's just kill that and run Opentoonz again. Let's just see if maybe reopening it solves the problem, because that is kind of a clearly that's a bug. That's not desirable behavior. All right, and then what I want to do is pull up the goth guy scene. Let's just see what happens. Yeah, see, now it's working. Okay, so, and I will say that more often than not, I have found this to be the case with Opentoonz, is if something really funky goes on, just closing it and reopening seems to solve it. So it's not really desirable behavior, but it's not the end of the world either. Okay, so we've covered using the skeleton tool. Again, I'll recap. My opinion, don't set up your hierarchy with the skeleton tool. Go ahead and just do it with the schematic view. Set the pivot points for the pieces of your character with the animate tool. And I didn't really cover that, but the upshot is this. With the skeleton tool, you can set the pivot point for your different levels. What I found is, I mean, maybe I'm an idiot, but it seems persnickety to me. Whereas if you just grab the animate tool and put it in position mode, or I'm sorry, center mode, then you just drag the center wherever you want. And as you can see, if I were to rotate this, it's going to rotate around that center point. Well, changing the center point that way, again, reflects perfectly in the skeleton tool. So when you go back to the skeleton tool, what the skeleton tool does give you, which is nice, is that if this character had multiple levels, like an arm consisting of, say, a body, a forearm, or a upper arm, then a forearm and a hand, then just by clicking on any one of those pieces, Opentoonz seems to do a good job of knowing which level you're trying to manipulate, and then you can directly move or rotate it right in the view. Whereas if you were using the animate tool to do the same thing, which you could, you have to switch manually between like position and rotation. So the skeleton tool is kind of a shortcut that way. In my opinion, the greatest value of it is the switching, the way we can switch between either mouth shapes or, you know, you might have pre-baked drawings of different position of a hand, or I mean, of an arm, you know, where it's bent or not, and you just want to switch between them, that sort of thing. So it's really useful for that. Okay, so now the next step is we're going to look at the plastic tool and how we could make it so we can make this look more articulated, but we want to do it in a way where we really have control of what gets animated. So I'm going to do that by hitting the X key and just create a mesh. Okay, and the default looks pretty good to me. So usually I find I push the mesh edge length up just because it's easier on the system, you know, but you know, that's your call. Try it different ways and see if your machine slows down. This laptop that I use for these videos is not a particularly powerful laptop. It actually is, it's got Pentium chips in it, so you know, that's not the greatest. All right, so now what I'm going to do is my concept here is that I want to create a skeleton, pivots around the neck, and then moves the whole head. Like I said, we're gonna just see how this works. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to here. And what I'm hoping is that by having all these extra branches, when I move this one, this bone that I'm branching off from, it'll sort of carry everything else with it. So let's just see if it works. Again, you can experiment on your own, but okay, so now I'm going to switch to animate mode, and let's just see what happens. By the way, this is another thing I've noticed, is that when you're using the skeleton tool, after you manipulate a bone, hit the escape key so that Opentoonz knows that you let go of that bone. I won't even try to demonstrate what will happen if it gets confused, but the upshot is I can be manipulating this bone, and then I'll click over here to grab this bone, let's say, and if it gets confused, it'll turn this bone all the way over to here, and you know, everything gets all messed up. So, but yeah, so now I achieved exactly what I wanted. By having all these extra bones, Opentoonz is, and having them being children of this one main bone I'm turning, has given me exactly what I was after, where he bends at the neck and the head basically moves as a single unit. And I could have actually put in more branches, say, off of this one, in order to like wave the hair a little bit or whatever. So now let's go ahead and just go down here. And I'm going to just kind of do it like this. So I think the lesson here is that if you plan carefully, you can get a lot of interactivity without having to do a quadzillion drawings. So now I'm going to go ahead and hide this, click here, and just hit the L key, and you can see that obviously he's moving stupidly fast, but let's go ahead and move that to 12 frames a second. Okay, and we're going to let the animation bake, and then in a minute here we're going to be done. Okay, and there you go. So pretty quick, pretty effective. The skeleton tool and the plastic tool, if you use them correctly, very, very useful. So that's it for today. See you next time.